Okay, well, welcome everyone again. It's great to see familiar faces, and I'm really excited to continue our conversation from last time. Um, as you probably noticed, the conversation will be very similar in terms of um, tackling some of these issues about what can and cannot be discussed on university spaces, in universities, etc. So the topic in general is free speech. And I thought that a good conversation starter would be this podcast, which was really kind of a book review. I really enjoy these interviews about books. Um, the author, I believe, was Bradford Vivian, and the book is called Campus Misinformation. And I was really enticed to read the book after listening to that podcast. Um, and it is, by the way, for those who have UCF access, it is freely available through our library. And basically, just to give a premise, I guess I should probably ask, is there anyone who did not listen to the podcast? Steve, okay, I will give a really, really brief overview that hopefully will not be tedious to everyone else, but I think is helpful also to kind of refresh our memories anyway. So basically, the premise of the book is that we tend to hear all these arguments recently that I think are very well encapsulated into this relatively recent book called The Coddling of the American Mind, co-authored by Jonathan Haidt, who we at the Ethics Center know well, and another author, I believe, who's called Greg Lukianoff, I think is the name. And basically, the idea is that we have all these, it's not just in that book, of course, it's a general point that we keep hearing, but it's that universities have become less and less tolerant. There's no space for diversity, especially political diversity and opinions, because students are less and less tolerant and liberal in more radical ways, such that they tend to squash, any political dissent and not want speakers on campuses, things of that sort. There's talking points about safe spaces, trigger warnings, etc. And what this book does, which I think is interesting, just because you don't hear that a lot, is it kind of challenges these assumptions that we hear a lot in the media and says that they're really quite unsubstantiated, and that universities are in fact quite open compared to other social institutions in terms of the freedom to the respect for people's rights, the freedom to speak, and that a lot of these calls that we hear to broaden free speech on campus are really kind of a red herring kind of argument that's based on anecdotes that are kind of presented as statistical evidence, but are not really generalizable in any meaningful way, and provides kind of a historical outlook as well as a social science outlook to justify this claim. And basically saying that these points about free speech on campus being threatened are in fact the actual threat to free speech on campus, which narrows diversity of opinion down to very specific pull between mainstream, or one might say generalized stereotypical understandings of what liberal and conservative opinions are, and in that sense kind of says that conservative opinions are not given enough attention, and traditional, these liberal opinions that we see in universities are becoming an orthodoxy. And what the author argues is that this kind of reduces diversity to these two issues rather than just promoting a general diversity of opinion that comes with having a diverse student group. I guess that was longer than the 2 minutes I promised, so I apologize for that. But yeah, my thoughts were to start the conversation by opening it up to see what people thought. of those of you who did listen to the podcast, and those who did not, I was curious to hear what your thoughts are about this issue more broadly as people who are in university spaces. What is your perception? Are these narratives that we hear accurate according to your understanding of what the university looks like, or are they misconstrued, maybe accurate for some universities, but not for others? What are your general impressions, I guess?
Do you want us to raise our hands to be acknowledged, or since we have such a small group, just have a sort of open flow of
Yes,
conversation?
I think Stephen, the latter is probably sufficient for a small group.
Yeah. So I did listen to it. This thing that he talked about with the artificial balance with science, using misrepresentation of data, and then go into social media with it, certainly attracted a misunderstanding of what actually is going on in the broader sense on college campuses. And then, of course, that kind of flows through the broader society too, kind of giving a bad reputation or bad name, I think, to what is actually going on college campuses. So,
yeah, I think that's the point I think you're talking about, Stephen, is the one about pseudoscience, or I think that was
yes.
a term used. But yeah, basically, um, the fact that there are, just for those who might not be familiar with this point, that there are some surveys of political opinions in the student body, but that these surveys are not well designed in order to actually be accurate representations of what student perceptions in universities across the country are. And the second point about that is, again, that there are these anecdotal components that are taken and generalized, presented as if they were broad findings in databases on the internet about people being silenced and universities revoking invitations for speakers and things of that sort. When in fact, looking at what happens more broadly on campuses, these are not really findings that prove the points being made.
Well, and the other point was that there were extremist groups that actually promoted controversial speakers on campus just to set that up, so that they then would use that for talking points, trying to provoke a reaction. In addition, I don't know if you want to comment on that as well. So that was disturbing to hear that, but I know that that's true. See what else we have.
Yeah, I think that was also an interesting point, and contextualized by the author again as a general trend where um, there's some organized interests trying to promote certain speakers who are more extreme, and these speakers typically use kind of this idea of free speech and First Amendment rights in order to make arguments that actually squash First Amendment rights of others, and how this is sometimes coupled by extremist groups that are I guess I didn't understand that point fully, but it seemed to me the idea was that they organized in order to provoke peaceful protesters, in order to kind of create events that can be labeled as violent protests against these speakers.
Yeah, it's kind of pushing the boundaries of free speech to where maybe even the people that are promoting free speech think, well, gee, maybe that goes too far. I think he used the term constitutional hardball. I don't know if you could explain that. That was a little, but he said it sort of hyper partisan free speech rights to shock the reaction, just as you said. And he talked a little bit about the history starting actually with the civil rights movement, of course, and opening up the colleges, universities, affirmative action, and so on. Uh, and and that provoked a reaction. Uh, I guess that was kind of an example, and then it just proceeded from there.
Yes, I did find that historical perspective really interesting, which I was not particularly familiar with, but the point in that was that you generally heard the same kinds of arguments when following Brown v. Board of Education, universities were trying to desegregate. And there were these talking points that universities are filled with radicals and socialists trying to essentially present universities as places that are kind of threatened and that need to be perhaps delegitimized in ways that the author argues universities are becoming delegitimized in the public mind, or at least in certain, public conversations.
Yeah, that's the way I understood it as well. Yes.
That history is like one I kind of feel embarrassed with myself because I knew the first part and second part. I never put them together in the story like that. So hearing that and then I was like, oh, that this is like there's a through line here. It was interesting, but at the same time, it made me. Well, there's two thoughts I had. One is that it made me like a little bit like skeptical of myself because my hairs went up in a certain way where it feels like it almost feels a little too perfect. So I was wondering if I don't know if other folks here maybe have thoughts, but like it feels a little too perfect that it's just, oh yeah, they've always been saying the university doesn't have space for speech and it's always this right wing fake thing. And it felt a little bit like too good to be true, meaning it's not like actually good, but like fits the story I want to tell myself about what this is, that this isn't a really red herring. And then it had a tension with that part of myself where I'm thinking like there is also like I don't know, maybe I should just speak for myself here. Certainly I know there's certain positions that I maybe ought not take in school. Not that I haven't, like I wouldn't take at the university. And I certainly know when I'm teaching students are hyper aware of like cool opinions. Like when you're talking about abortion, it's very difficult to get students to take on a pro-life position. Now, is that because they all disagree? Well, no, actually, because I know some of the students actually are pro-life, so to speak. But and so there's like there feels to be. I mean, I don't accept the full argument out of the Colorado American mind. I don't, right? But I think there seems to be something that's identifying there. And so I do wonder like how much sorry, I should have been clear where I was going with this thought. Two things, I guess. So one, the story seems like to fit the image I want to tell myself, but I wonder if it's a little bit too good to be true in the sense that like, and then two, I feel like there is something I've noticed in personal experience as a teacher of ethics, right? That there does seem to be this sense that students really do have of what they should and shouldn't say, not because they think it, but because they recognize how it's going to be accepted socially. And of course, I had things to say about that too, but I don't know. I'll stop for a moment.
Yeah, so as I understand it, Josh, coming back to that question that I asked earlier, it's your impression, it seems, that there is something to these arguments that we're hearing, and that the author might perhaps be a bit off, at least, to the extent that your experiences as an instructor
Or
are
even like
concerned.
we're all in the midst of this the war in Palestine, right? That's one thing where we can find example after example, like universities have a very difficult time saying certain things on this issue without a lot of backlash. And so there seems to be there's an instance like I mean there's professors who lost jobs or have difficulty because of their positions on this, right? Or what they've said, right? And so I think there seems to be some evidence that the free speech zones are not being protected, so to speak, is the case, right? So I don't know. And I know this book is from before that particular thing, but there was that the Palestine Israel stuff's been going on for a while.
Steve?
I just wonder in these instances where there's claims of backlash and oppression of speech, is it always backlash, or is it perhaps within the context of education a requirement to defend one's position? And that maybe some students are uncomfortable with the pressure and the obligation, the responsibility associated with defending a position. So if you're pro-life or pro-abortion or whatever you're pro, do you have a set of logical arguments and rhetoric to back up what the claim is? That cuts to critical thinking. How well are we teaching critical thinking in a university? How well are we putting critical thinking as the clear goal, as opposed to just coming away with certain specific points of knowledge? And I think we try to do a lot of critical thinking at the university. There's challenges there. There's problems with curricular space. There's a lot of stuff you got to teach. There's a lot of remediation you got to do, and I find there's not enough time to allow students to engage in critical thinking, to find they have the time and the bandwidth to go to talks and participate. And so where they're put in an instance of disagreement, I wonder if there's fundamentally a challenge and a sense of inadequacy that causes them to not be able to respond and defend positions, so they instead feel attacked. Could that be central to the problem? And then that's translated outside the university as, oh, safe spaces are shutting down conversation, or speech is not allowed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Steve. And I find myself wondering also, and from my experience as a university instructor as well, I always kind of wondered whether, even though there were very explicit norms about the fact that everyone can express their opinion, everyone should be listening to what others are saying, and I always tried to probe a bit into, understanding more students' opinions, like ask them to say more, perhaps, or explain their thoughts a bit more, to clarify some ideas, because it's easy to just say, I'm of the opinion X, but that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't necessarily say much about what the logic behind that is, what the reasoning. There might be underlying points where we agree, but draw different conclusions, things of that sort. And it seems, if I understand you correctly, that you have a feeling that perhaps students might not be, and please let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, students might not be prepared to take that extra step, and for that reason, kind of may preemptively silence themselves to avoid being in the discomforting position of not being able to justify their opinions. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. To Josh's experience and Josh's point, I wonder if the culture in which these students are raised causes them to come to his class feeling, not just that it's not cool to be pro-life, but they're not prepared to make some rhetorical arguments as to why that position makes sense, in terms of their own values, but not just in terms of their own values, in terms of a societal value. So when we talk about, ethics and societal values, or societal norms, and where we should go on issues, we're really talking about how to balance different values, potential competing interests, things that maybe cut into or against certain, cultural mores or religious mores. And so, if people could articulate that more clearly, what the framing is for their viewpoints, maybe that's where you can find some common ground and some deeper understanding, and then move things forward. But if you're not ready to engage in that, if you just feel like anyone who disagrees is threatening me, is calling me down, is implying I'm stupid or anything, then it's not going to be productive. So sure, it's incumbent upon us to provide those spaces. They're not the same thing as safe spaces. They're intellectual spaces. They're spaces where synthesis and discussion of ideas happens. And that's traditionally what universities have been. That's my experience in a university. But it's a two-way street. You have to create the space, and then you have to come in and engage in the space. And that takes work. That's like you sign up for the class and you sign up to engage in those kinds of discussions. There's like a social contract. Okay, I'm going to bring something to the discussion. I'm going to do some thinking, do some reading, and I'm going to listen. And I'm going to, present arguments like a proof, and, those sorts of things, so that people can follow what I'm thinking. Right? That's a lot of work.
I think you do have to set up in advance, though, your expectations of respect for the opinions of others. And I think whether you're conservative or liberal, I've heard it on both sides when students protest an invited speaker. You know, if they're liberal, they protest a conservative speaker. Or when he actually shows up in the auditorium to give a speech, they shout him down and don't even let him, you know, make his point. That's disturbing, whether it's conservative or liberal, I think. So, yeah, I think you need to sort of set the ground rules ahead of time in that free space that you're talking about to let students know expectation is preserve the rights of others to express their opinion.
I think along those lines, especially what Josh and Dr. Kula were saying, the one phenomenon I'm observing often in my classes is I always ask my students why for any stance. And the stances that are more popular or cool, students not only are unprepared to provide that logical backing, but they almost feel like, wait, why? Isn't this what everyone agrees on? Why do I have to defend this? So I think there is an element of that social pressure that Josh was talking about from the peers, both on both sides though. The students who are perhaps in the minority opinion of a specific topic or stance, they may not feel like they have the capability in that space to provide the logical backing, that stepwise proof of how they got to their point. But on the other side, the students with the more popular opinion, they're certainly not prepared because they feel like they've never had to, because they've just aligned with the norm, whether they truly feel that way or not.
That's a great point. Students tend to hang around with people that are like-minded. I mean, we all do that, right? So how often do you find students actually seeking to discuss or debate people that have an opposing opinion? Not often enough. So it is up to the professor, I think, to invite them, to try to bring those groups together for critical thinking. Absolutely.
So the view I'm hearing is not as if the students are like too lazy to take a position. It's that they're too lazy to critically evaluate the position that they have taken. Does that sound right?
Or perhaps, as I understand it, don't feel the need. Perhaps, you know, and this is the idea of hegemony, right? Like that something is just so taken for granted that it feels just common sense. It's like, oh yeah, why would I need to defend it, right? Everyone knows that that is the right thing. That at least that's how I understand these points, and it seems to me that sometimes cultural ideas do have that hegemonic grip, so that to one point, yeah, we might not feel ready to defend them, but it might have not even occurred to us, you know, taking a step back, that they even need defending.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the term lazy, and I think it's good to use it because it kind of forces us to narrow our position a little more clearly. But there's certainly no pejorative that I would use. No, it's not that they are lazy, it's that they're not equipped with the ability to engage in the discussion rhetorically. They've not been challenged maybe earlier, or it's not part of their experience that you engage in challenging discussions, perhaps because they're locked into an echo chamber, perhaps because either the schools they're in or the communities they're in do not embrace other positions. So there's this weird dichotomy to me that we're in this melting pot of a society, but we face separated into separate little groups that actually don't want to meld, you know, and melt together. So we're not prepared to have those kinds of conversations. And yet those very kinds of conversations are the ones that actually enable democracy.
Yeah. So I want to do a little tracing here because my mind's been racing about the sort of lineage we've been talking about. So the Bradford Vivian book about misinformation is one thing. The Coddling of the American Mind, I think, presents a different view. But all of those come from the 1985 closing of the American. Between those three works tells a really interesting story to me. So working backwards, there's the sense that Vivian is after in this book that there are things in the way, even if our students were equipped, there's things now in the way of their making normative evaluations. The coddling of the American mind, the height position is students aren't equipped. I think that's right. But the Bloom model, 1985, Bloom's model was grumpy old white man, like, we ought to be teaching great books because students don't have the capacity to. They're distracted by music and culture, and they're not interested in like the hard, important questions. So there's the not interested, the not equipped, and the disempowered in that trajectory. And I think that's super interesting, reading those three books together.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Jonathan. And I think that obviously the coddling of the American mind invokes Bloom's book just because of its title. And I recall also, just to give people a sense, that there's kind of a critique of the postmodern way of thinking that's relativistic, and that things are true even if there are no essential truths, but multiple things can be true at the same time. And so it doesn't really, matter to hold things up to scrutiny, I think, is one of the points that Bloom was making. Lucy, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I joined a little bit late. Sorry about that. I've just been listening to what everyone has been saying, and I think an important part that is kind of being glossed over in all of this is that the American education system, is so different for so many different types of people and different backgrounds. And like, yes, like some people aren't ready to defend their position because they haven't been challenged like they are in higher education, or that's just how our education system kind of works. Like, depending on your neighborhood, depending on your city, depending on your state, you have access to varying degrees of opinions and materials and ideas. So I don't think it's because people don't want to defend themselves, or that they're intellectually lazy, or they think that something's cool. Maybe they just genuinely haven't ever been asked that question. So I think that's worth thinking about as well from like a sociological perspective.
Absolutely, yes. I think that is a great point, in terms of, and I guess my perhaps my way of presenting it as a hegemony might have been a bit misleading, in the sense that when you have social location matter in terms of what knowledge you have access to, then there is significant differences in terms of what people are in a position to know to begin with, which puts some things within your radar and some things completely off the radar. So yeah, but I think that highlights even more so the idea, I guess, that Vivian was kind of pointing to in having genuine diversity, and diversity in a very expansive way, rather than this very stereotypical, let's counter liberal diversity with conservative, liberal opinions with conservative opinions, but rather let's have as much intellectual diversity, which often maps to demographic diversity as well, as possible, in order to have richer understandings of the state of things. So thank you for that, Lucy.
I wonder if one of the reasons why there's a bit of resistance to critical thinking and formal scholarly, gentlemanly discourse is because it seems like it's acceptable in this day and age for things to escalate to name calling and sometimes violence. And of course, that should never be acceptable. And name calling, of course, serves no purpose in critical thinking at all. And yet, if you don't have a solid logical background, your own data, your own facts, if you're not ready to present those, then what do? You fall back on name calling and sometimes even violence. And students aren't ready for that. Maybe they just feel like they don't want to engage at all. They don't have their facts if they're not ready, if they're not prepared.
Absolutely. And I think that this, the name calling that you talk about, Stephen, also kind of, first of all, essentializes humans, but it also poses an identity threat to them that makes them shut down, because you're not really engaging with ideas. That people can have mistaken ideas. I'm sure I have. Everyone probably has some, and it's okay to have those challenged. But you need to approach someone in a way that makes it clear that you're not against who they are. Like the typical, everyone left, extreme right, labeling the opposite as a fascist, for instance, kind of essentializes them and diminishes the ability to engage with their ideas genuinely, which may be not good ideas, of course, and they merit criticism, but it kind of shuts down these conversations. Steve?
So I was going to say that since defending positions, using reason and data is something that I value, something that I think we value in the universities. For that reason, I hate Fox News and I hate MSNBC, which are two opposite ends of the political spectrum. I watch MSNBC and I think it's as bad as Fox in terms of blasting out emotive statements and claims without really searching for, a higher truth in the reporting. So I think for sure you can find problems across that political spectrum where the idea of critical thinking and engaging with a subject is not being supported. So to that point, I wonder if, all speakers and all positions are really have a place at a university, in that, our place is to teach critical thinking. So sure, you can have lots of opinions and say we shouldn't ban anyone from speaking here. But what if the person that's being invited engages in the kind of name calling that Stephen Hall talks about, rather than engaging in, an approach of critical thinking? They tend to, get into ad hominem attacks. Then it doesn't really matter what their position is. They don't really have a place here. We do have limited resources. Our students have limited time. We have limited budgets and limited ability to, have any old speaker out here. So we do have to, be a little selective where we're doing the choosing, and, where students are doing the choosing. Hopefully they would be trying to bring in speakers that, engage in critical thinking. And, it might be unfortunate if within one set of views, the speakers that are being invited are engaging in more ad hominem attacks. And so they don't kind of meet the criterion of come present an idea and engage in critical thinking. That would be unfortunate. But I think it's okay to say, no, you don't have a place here, in the same way that I teach science and I don't have space, for flat Earth, and I don't have space for the Earth is only 6,000 or 10,000 years old, and there's a lot of things that don't make sense. They may be different opinions, but they don't fit within the thinking process. They're not part of science, and so they don't have a place.
Lucy?
Yeah, I have to agree with Steve on some of that in regards to, having to interface with people on campus, whether they're invited or if they're just religious zealots that they let on campus. I'm not really sure what that is adding to, the academic education that people are trying to get here, other than just acknowledging that other opinions exist, which I think is valuable. But is it something that needs to be acknowledged or interfaced with? And I feel that way about some of the speakers that get invited. And I know that Stephen had mentioned something about protesters, protesting over speakers that the university has potentially brought in, and saying how that's impeding on free speech. But isn't it free speech to also counter whatever someone else is talking about? you know? So where is the line? Which is free speech and which is not? Just some thoughts.
Well, I mentioned not only, protesting is fine. Shouting a speaker down where the audience cannot even hear what they're saying is also part of what I said. But no, I agree with you completely as far as the protest. Sure, if you don't think that's an acceptable speaker, then state why. Why is that not an acceptable speaker? Take a look at, where else have they spoken? And I agree, limited resources. So yes, you have to be a little bit selective, I think, as Steve said, for sure, within reason. So yes.
Yeah, these are all great points, and it seems to me like we're kind of converging. I guess I don't want to speak for people who haven't expressed opinions on this matter, but it seems that there's a belief that there are some limits to free speech on campus, and if we take kind of Steve's approach, um, these are directly related to the pedagogical, educational mission or scientific mission, however one wants to think about it, of the university. I wonder what other people think about that specific way of limiting free speech, but also the place of free speech in general on campus.
I've always been impressed with the University of Central Florida, where people could stand outside the student union and hand out materials. And some of them, are ones that are objectionable to me, but I don't actually object to the person handing those materials out. In some cases, it's religious material. In other cases, it's atheistic materials. There's certainly groups that oppose abortion. They hand out their materials. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I can remember some years ago with a Palestinian group who had set up in one of the fields with large posters and groups. Of course, this is very timely now with what's going on, but they talked about how Palestinians, of course, were being discriminated against by Israel. And I remember walking by and then deciding to engage in a discussion with one of them. And I said, I can appreciate your point of view, but I don't understand, why is it that your people don't feel Israel has the right to exist at all? Maybe that's the starting point. And his argument basically was, well, we can't do it because Hamas controls us. And so I said, well, why don't you rise up against Hamas? And he said, well, we can't do it. They have the weapons. They have the support. Well, it was a good discussion. I learned a lot from it, as a matter of fact. But I always appreciated UCF does provide that open space, that free space for students to express their opinions. And some of them are harsh, some of them are extreme. But I don't have a problem as long as it's fairly cordial.
So perhaps there is, I guess, space for all opinions to be present. Maybe not, mandate students to attend a lecture that directly conflicts with the mission of the university in ways that Steve outlined, for instance, just presenting arguments that are ad hominem, not engaging genuinely with ideas, not providing good justification, but that might still leave room for open space where this kind of democratic exchange can happen regardless, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I would add there might actually be places to bring in, a speaker to talk about, I don't know, something I might disagree with, like flat Earth. If it provides an opportunity for students to engage and to find potential fallacy in the argument and to learn about how to construct better arguments. It might be very instructive for students to engage and be able to identify, oh, that's a misappropriation of one idea, or that's a logical fallacy. So it can also be really a learning experience, right? It's all about how it's structured and what is the potential for engagement. And what is the purpose? Is the purpose just to give equal airtime to every opinion, no matter what the opinion is? because all opinions count and that's First Amendment, or is the goal to support an educational mission, and then within that we will have a space where you can engage with different viewpoints and different opinions.
I love that idea. So when you step out of your home and look down the street, the earth is flat. So, right? So if you're teaching phenomenological philosophy, then sure. So how does it appeal to you emotionally? Well, yeah, it looks flat. So obviously, yeah, you can make a whole philosophical discussion, I think, on just with that starting point. So yes.
Wonder if there's space in that conversation to differentiate between like epistemically grounded claims and value differences. Like I've always been inclined to want to hear every value perspective, right? So if somebody, this is the abortion debate, right? The pro and con, there's epistemic facts of the matter that we can ground. And if somebody's argument or position is grounded in epistemic shortcoming, that's a position that we shouldn't just advocate freely every which way. That's the flat earth debate too, right? Like, I don't think we need flat earth proponents on campus. If somebody wants to do a debate about why people would hold the flat earth view and as a teaching mechanism, that's a different thing. And I don't think anybody would question that would fall under universities' engagement. But yeah, I think there's space there to think about value differences versus epistemic differences.
Is that a clean difference, though? I mean, I might be conflating things here, but I'm thinking about the Alabama decision, that says fertilized eggs are babies, right? So that makes a claim that then in some way becomes, I don't know if it's really an epistemic truth, but it makes a claim, it creates a definition that then causes legality to apply. Now, someone else may disagree and say, no, that is not a child on various arguments. You could take this to some maybe reductio absurdum examples that are a little more clean cut, like 1 and 1 is 2, right? But I do think that there's, for more nuanced arguments, there can be a gray area between what is a value claim versus an epistemic claim.
Yeah, Steve, that makes total sense. And I guess what I said sort of flies in the face of my own position, which is that the ethical and the epistemic are like intimately related, right? So to think we can somehow divide them out. Yeah. I guess maybe what I'm trying to articulate is something like the proselytizing move, right? If somebody just says, here is my position, I just need it heard, and I want to convince other people, that's different than here's my position, I want to better understand yours vis-a-vis that position. That should happen at the university, and the proselytizing move should not. Might be a different argument. And that's right. That's not ethical versus epistemic, but it's still like directing my value versus understanding my value. I'm rambling now, Lucy.
No, I agree with a lot of that. And as a scientist or a person trying to be a good scientist, I tend to get really angry with my own kind, who will be rabid anti-theists. I really get upset with scientists who say science shows there is no God. It just annoys the hell out of me because there's no proof for that. It's really, I think, it's really undermining the mission of science to say that there's some way to prove that. Now, it's true, there may be dogma and theology and claims that are tied to a religion that science over time disproves, like, an earth-centered universe and such. But that is not the same as saying, therefore, by gross extrapolation, everything in the religion is wrong and God doesn't exist. And I think there's this tension there that kind of drives these battles, because people have looked at how science has evolved over time and said, well, it's just a war on belief, and it's partly maybe our fault for not countering other scientists and saying, is that really what you got an experiment for that? Where's your proof? What experiment did you do that there is no God? So, maybe we can also learn from looking at how we've kind of undone truth and gone beyond our mandates in certain disciplines. I don't know. That's probably not a popular opinion. So I can be one of the speakers of unpopular opinions in your class, John.
I had a debate with a colleague of mine just last week. We were playing chess, and this came up, and he definitely equated religion to flat Earth. So You might be in the minority, but I'm there with you.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you, Steve. I absolutely agree with you. I was thinking about how I might debate a person who comes from a non-religious, totally non-religious point of view, and I'm kind of agnostic myself, but I would start with, is there a creation? I mean, nobody can deny the fact that, yeah, we're here. There must have been a creation. And then the next point would be, then is there a creator, or at least a creative force in the universe? Well, well, what do you want to call it? Well, some people choose to call it God. Maybe others call it natural law, physics, whatever. So yeah, I think you could at least begin to have some common ground, at least. I mean, nobody knows how we originated, how we got here. So yes.
Yeah, I want to add just to what Jonathan was speaking on earlier, because I think the example of the flat earther speaking is kind of operating in this silo of something that really isn't that dangerous per se. Like, who is it harming that someone believes that the earth is flat, you know, as opposed to someone that comes in and is like, oh, XYZ people are, you know, subhuman, and here's why. You know, I think that there's a difference to be made there, between like scientific debate and other types of debate. And I know that there is some crossover with religion, but I think I just wanted to expound on what Jonathan maybe was saying a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Lucy, that's super helpful. It does make sense. I guess the one thing I might push you a little bit on there is like, I worry that some ideas which seem, I'm going to use the term silly, and that's perhaps not fair, but silly ideas like flat earth ideas, they tend to be linked to other beliefs that might be more dangerous. So it might be the case that the same person who believes in flat earth might also believe that vaccines are bad for us, or right, there might be some link to those. So understanding sort of how science works fundamentally might link those things together. And so that would be my only concern. But yeah, if somebody just holds an idea that, like flat earth, that doesn't seem to hurt anybody, and that's the extent of their I'll call them misbeliefs, then I'm totally on board with you, Lucy. Yeah.
Yeah, these are both great points, Lucy and Jonathan. I think that is an interesting point that kind of brings front and center also the ethical implications of free speech, right? Because it's easy, especially in a university context, we focus on the epistemic aspect, right? Like these ideas of knowledge, truth, etc., which we see really embedded in our mission. But then there are these still, you know, philosophical, still debated topics, for instance, about human equality. And I assume that most of us in universities are proponents of equality, but there are people who are not and could be invited on campus. And of course, there are more and less reasonable arguments that can be made against equality. So I don't want to deny that. But I do think it raises interesting implications when the speech itself borders to making claims that may themselves be hurtful, right? May violate the dignity of a person just by listening to them, let alone inspire action that can be literally dangerous for people. So that kind of, I think that is an interesting point, and that the author of the book kept trying to emphasize, because it was these kinds of speakers that he was talking about being silenced, typically in universities, and that their opinions were perhaps presented as being more reasonable or, you know, abstractly conservative opinions. So they appear more reasonable than they actually were. Or at least, if we don't want to think about this in terms of reasonableness, in terms of the ethical impact that this kind of speech has, and the actual and potential harm that it causes. So I think that's an interesting point to consider, especially given that it might not be an explicit mission of universities to make sure that students are protected in every possible way. After all, they are adults. They're not mandated to be there. It's not like a secondary education or primary education, but there still seems to be something there to, I think, what most people working in universities would feel like an obligation to protect our students.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I'm rather disturbed by the University of Florida shutting down their DEI department, and I wonder where UCF stands on that, as a matter of fact. UCF has always had their diversity week, as a matter of fact, which has been great. I was pleased that the appeals court just recently rejected DeSantis' stop woke training rules. I don't know that will, of course, be appealed by the governor and his bunch, but I am rather disturbed by the trend of what's going on in that regard.
Yes, Stephen, I am having a hard time, I'll admit, getting my head around the relationship between what's happening in Florida and the bigger sort of nationwide conversations that Haidt and others are leading about basically the culture wars at the university, like whether it's too liberal or too conservative, or
Right.
those things are in my head only tangentially related or accidentally related, but maybe not.
Well, and it goes to what Alex was just saying about, you know, protecting students against, you know, harsh criticism that is, you know, has no data to back it up, and where they can feel that that they can express themselves as part of a group that maybe is not the larger group. I mean, I think that's necessary to do that.
And to kind of bring it back to the values, right? Thinking about free speech as a really important democratic value, but how that may conflict with the value of, you know, protecting humans' safety, or, you know, being able to feel safe in a particular space. And kind of, you know, when you're trying to make these moral calculations, it's never straightforward, but it's interesting to think if indeed some speaker who wants to make a claim or even an argument, right? Maybe they're trying to provide reasons that someone should be treated as less than human, whether the harm to them is significantly outweighed, for instance, by the right of people to feel safe and respected as, you know, being fundamentally human and having fundamental moral value as humans. And in which case, you know, again, that might be a limit to free speech, where we can feel comfortable enough saying, you know what, yeah, it would be good if you could express your opinion openly and have a conversation, but in, you know, in this particular space, maybe of the university or a smaller subspace of the university, we would rather have you not be able to enjoy this freedom than to have someone who will be significantly harmed from the expression of such an opinion, I guess. And again, like I said, these are not easy calculations. So I don't want to diminish in any way, you know, free speech or present it as very straightforward and easy to always make a determination about what can and cannot be said. But I do think that I do worry, rather, that these arguments about open free speech, no matter what, no matter the context, can have significant implications that free speech advocates sometimes, not that they don't consider them, but they might perhaps not lend, enough weight to them, moral weight to them.
I totally agree with you. Students that have lived sort of a sheltered existence at home, perhaps in a small group, maybe in a small town, coming to a big university, it can present ontological shock. And I think students or schools need to be prepared to deal with traumatized students that actually come exposed to this exchange of ideas that they're not used to. And that can be a problem. And I think professors need to be on the lookout for that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, this has been a really rich discussion as always, but I want to say that we have reached the hour mark, and I want to be mindful of people's time. But if anyone wants to add anything, any concluding remarks, please, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, let me just add to Jonathan and Steve. In your invitation to these things, I would say, first of all, do what I said before, is send out a notice the day, or at least the day before. The other thing is invite students to bring their lunch. I mean, after all, this is during the lunch hour. Tell them that, hey, they can come, they can eat, they can drink, while we're discussing. Make it, a little bit less formal, perhaps, unless you have a larger group then. But yeah, tell them bring your lunch. Which I did actually. So, but I was a little reluctant not to eat in front of everybody. But yeah, make it so it's casual. It's fun. Just
That is cool, Stephen. Yeah, we'll keep pushing to bring students, and we've been inviting folks. I mean, again, these links are open to everyone, so we'd welcome any conversation. We'll keep trying to get students involved, and I would just add, Alex, thanks for leading these discussions this semester. They've been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying the conversations.
Thank you.
I
And
also want to add, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Lucy.
I've been meaning to join. I'm a student. And the link on the actual page to the Zoom, I think, is wrong, but the link to the Zoom on the document is correct. That's why I joined late, because it sent me to a different lobby, I think.
That's on my shoulder. Yeah, I will fix that right after.
So I don't know.
Great
Maybe
to
it's
know.
just
Thank
me.
you.
I don't know if anyone had the same issue, but I realized that after like 10 minutes, I was like, oh, I need to use this link and not the other one. So maybe there's someone out there that also tried to join and was just like, oh, I guess it's not happening.
Yeah, there may be a whole crowd out there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes. Thanks for letting us know, Lucy, and for your persistence to be here enough that you found a way to do it. And no
Yes,
worries
I'm
about
here.
being late. Even if you can come, half hour later, you're always welcome, and everyone's always welcome.
Yeah, for sure. Spread the word, bring your friends, and bring your lunch.
Yeah, and the one good thing too, of course, is the link that's in the information that was sent out originally. It's the same for all of these, as I understand. Is that right? So that tell people, hey, save that link. Once you get in, save that link, use that again for all of these discussions. So yes, very good. Thanks everybody. I enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks all.